Awesome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Revenue Ramble. Thanks a lot for joining us today. It is pretty exciting. I have an amazing speaker today. Today we have Vinay Bhagat, the CEO of TrustRadius. Vinay and I go back a little bit of time, 4 years, 3 years, 3+1, I don't know, something like that. We've been good friends. We have been interacting in the same B2B selling, buying, sales tech, martech space. You have been doing TrustRadius for about 12 years now, Vinay?
Almost, yeah. I started
Almost
in
10.
2012. Yeah,
Yeah, but your entrepreneurship goes even beyond that. You had a company called Convio that you founded as the CEO, and you drove it up. And then after some time, you handed off CEO to somebody else. You took like a chief strategy officer role. But that company was super successful, went on to become an IPO, and then got acquired for what, $325 million or something like that.
yeah.
So that was your first phase of your entrepreneurship. This is your second edition, I guess.
Indeed, it is. Hence the gray
That's
hairs.
awesome. I'm sure. I'm sure. It is always it's pretty tough to run one company. It is amazing that you running that for several years, you dived pretty much quickly into Trust Radius, right? What prompted you to start Trust Radius in the first place back in the day?
Yeah, I think it was a confluence of a few things. I'm a passionate entrepreneur, just like you. I just love what I do. I like solving hard problems and finding solutions to problems that exist and that I feel no one else has tackled adequately. The specific moments that led me to Trust Radius were actually a purchase that we made at my last company. By the time we exited, we were around 450 people, and therefore we used a lot of software to run our business. Uh,
Mhm.
and in fact, in the last year before we sold, we made 2 or 3 really major purchases, including a big HR platform. This particular platform cost us, I think, over $100,000 a year. We signed a multi-year contract. My HR team thought they were making a great decision. They relied on the Gartner MQ. They spoke to the references the vendor had supplied. But at the end of the day, they ended up picking a solution that didn't meet their use case. It had a fundamental flaw that was important to us. And that kind of was a wake-up moment for me to say, how is it that we could go through this fairly exhaustive purchasing process and then make a bad choice? Around the same time, I was buying a home appliance, a coffee machine, and I went through the process of going to Williams Sonoma to check out the products they have there. I didn't trust the advice I was getting from the salesperson because they're only trying to sell me a machine they had in stock. I asked a friend of mine, call a friend as we think of,
Yeah.
who drinks a lot of coffee, a physician, which machine he'd recommend. He recommended this product called Jura. But even though I'd got a friend's recommendation, I wanted to validate his recommendation. And I went online, read reviews on places like Amazon and Costco. They were okay, but relatively superficial. And then I found this site called Coffee Geeks that had reviews written by coffee mavens, people who are like really into coffee and these machines. And they're incredible. There was like these 1 to 2 page expositions on what it was like to maintain these machines, cost of ownership. And I was like, man, this is incredible. Why doesn't something like this exist for software? It's such a complex purchase. The decision's more consequential than buying a bad home appliance. And so that's how the idea of Trust Radius was born. I'd say the third thing is I'd built a B2B software company before, and that's where my expertise was. But I also wanted to experiment with doing something that had a consumer flavor to it. And this Trust Radius sort of has a consumer and a B2B flavor to it, which is fun.
Understood. Understood. That's awesome. As they say, the best problems, the best companies are founded when the entrepreneurs try to solve the problems that they noticed and experienced. So it looks like Trust Radius is born out of your own problem. It's also interesting that a lot of the guests that we have on Revenue Ramble are we talk from a seller's perspective, in the sense that we talk about how do you send emails or what does the sales process look like, but your vantage point is pretty different. You come from a buyer perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You think about the buyer experience a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, Gartner wrote like a page on buyer enablement, which I believe still is live. But that whole thing of buyer enablement is still not really there out in the world. But you are like a staunch proponent of the buyer experience and buyer enablement, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, I think how can you be successful at sales and marketing if you don't understand the buyer, right? In terms of what drives them, the demographic shifts that are occurring, the behavioral shifts that are occurring with buyers as well. There's a book called Jolt by Matt Dixon that's just a phenomenal read, but he talks a lot about how a lot of purchasing cycles result in no decision, right? There's a huge amount of wasted energy where people end up not making a final purchase decision. Beyond that, a lot of times people take the safe option, right? The biggest brand in the space versus the challenging product that may actually be better for them. And so poor decisions get made all the time, and no decisions get made all the time. And so I think, if you're a marketer or a salesperson, it's absolutely critical to get inside the heads of your buyers and to understand what they want from you and to meet them at that point of need. And this whole trend of buyer enablement is key.
Perfect. Let me tell the listeners why I requested you on a podcast, Vinay. So I think you got married recently, and I think you went for a honeymoon in Ubud. Much like all the entrepreneurs, while you were on a honeymoon, you were thinking about TrustRadius, which is hilarious in the first place. But I saw you posting a video
Yeah.
on LinkedIn saying about some of the, TrustRadius is your brainchild, and you were kind of rethinking what are the problems in the space, and you were starting to ponder over it, and you posted a video about it. And B2B reviews is something that I have also looked at. I've always been a believer in that space. And then 2 days back, you posted on LinkedIn saying B2B review sites are losing buyer confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And you had like this big explanation, problem, solution. So I wanted to double click specifically on that, which is why I requested, hey, let's dive in. So when you say B2B review sites are losing buyer confidence, what do you mean? What are the problems?
Well, I think, again, back to kind of what Matt Dixon talks about, buyers lack confidence to make decisions. They may be problem aware. They may be solution aware. Whether it's B2B review sites or other methods, there are a plethora of ways to identify available solutions in the marketplace. But the key problem is figuring out which solution is right for you and your specific use case, and then gaining confidence that it's going to work for you and that it's not going to be difficult to maintain, won't integrate with your stack, and it's just going to become shelfware. So when we think about kind of the key problem that we're trying to solve is how to go beyond product discovery to actually help buyers pick the right solution confidently. And from a vendor perspective, differentiate yourself, make sure you match with the right customers who are a good fit for your solution, and avoid no decision.
Got it. So that's like at a very high level, but specifically the problems that you have identified, and you talk about this in a little bit in your post. If you, let's say, take the top 3 problems that you think this space has at this point, which we need to improve on, what would those be?
So specifically with the B2B review space, I believe that vendors have been put on a hamster wheel of basically driving short form reviews that are meaningless. And they do this in order to get placed on 2x2s and to win badges. A lot of the sites have algorithms that are hyper tied to review volume, and not just review volume, but recent review volume, reviews published in the last quarter. And so that's trained vendors to think that they have to stay on this hamster wheel of continuously driving content. And there's no regard on whether the content is strategic and meeting the needs of buyers and meeting the needs of their own kind of content marketing as well. It's just this continuous treadmill hamster wheel of just driving shallow content. Mm-hmm. When we talk to buyers, and we do a survey, we've done a survey now for the last 7 years of over 2,000 buyers about what matters to them in the B2B purchasing journey and what matters to them specifically with respect to reviews. What matters is who is expressing an opinion. Are they someone credible? Are they someone I can trust? Are they someone who's got a use case similar to mine? And then secondly, what do they have to say? By far, those are the 2 most important factors. Down the list are things like scores, but not product scores, faceted scores like usability, scalability, etc. Way down the list is product scores, and almost at 0 is awards and badges. But vendors have been trained to clamor for these badges. Some of the sites in my space give them out like candy.
Participation trophies.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you have 300 badges in a
Yeah.
quarter to one vendor,
Right.
it's become so meaningless. And everybody has
Yeah.
the same badges. How does it possibly differentiate you? It's inane. As I don't know if you're a fan of Shark Tank, but Kevin sort of says, stop the madness or stop the
Stop the
insanity.
madness.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it's just insane. But that people have been trained, marketers have been trained to pursue these, and maybe it's coming down from the CEO who it's a nice ego boost for them. But buyers don't care. Buyers don't care about these badges because they're so pervasive that they become meaningless and they don't differentiate you. And yeah, you may have a slightly different badge to your competitor, but no one's going to look at that. They just see they see a panel of badges and they say, okay, that's nice, but it doesn't differentiate you. Secondly, the content is so shallow; it has no insight. Again, there was a study done by Joe Kevins, who runs a site called B2B SaaS Reviews. It's actually really good, got some great content on it. And he says that there are about 8 things that people look for in their reviews, like ROI data, what does a product integrate with, etc. And when you have a 2-line review, it's going to be divorced of that kind of insight. When you just ask, what do you like, what do you dislike, you get high-level commentary. It doesn't really help inform the buyer. And having 1,000 2-line reviews doesn't give you a lot of texture and detail. You're much better off having 100 meaningful, substantive reviews that actually answer the specific questions that buyers want, coupled with some kind of synthesis to make it easy for them to get to the answer. And then what they really want is a conversation. They want to talk to people and go beyond kind of what's written and have kind of an interaction of some kind. And that's what I see as the problem, is that there's this emphasis on pursuing vanity metrics, scores, badges, placement on 2x2s, and those aren't particularly meaningful to the buyer. Now, again, those review sites do serve the purpose of building visibility. So if you are, not the number one player in your space, it can be good to be present, to be seen. But when a space gets really crowded and there are 100 vendors on a grid, it becomes meaningless, right? It's just noise to the buyer. And again, the badges again are just noise. They don't register with the buyer as being important. Again, what they want to know is someone credible saying something that leads me to trust that this product is right for me.
Got you. I don't know how many points I can double click on this, but I have a few. So you mentioned there is a social proof element specifically, especially if you're not the top in your space. And if there are no other 90 vendors, then you're probably okay. But for the vendors who are listening to this, at what stage are the buyers actually coming to your sites? Are they like starting from you, or are they reading about it, going to their website, then coming to TR?
Yeah.
Or is it like they come again and again? What does the data tell you?
Yeah, they come across their journey. There's certainly people who are problem aware and trying to find alternative solutions. So, when we think about our own SEO strategy, we've tried to optimize for keywords like product X alternatives. So where someone is trying to literally do discovery and understand if they have an incumbent solution, what other options they should be looking for, or best XYZ software, where they really don't know the options that are available to them. So there are people who are fairly early in their search process trying to identify solutions. But then there are also people who've got a short list and they're just trying to compare. And so, one of the terms that we tend to rank well on are comparison terms, where people have 2 or 3 products in consideration. And then there's also the stage of the journey where someone is leaning towards a solution, but they want to validate and build more confidence that it's the right solution for them. And therefore, they're kind of digging in and spending more time. So customer voice is relevant across the buyer's journey, whether that's initial product discovery or confirming a final decision. And we do see traffic across all of those phases. But what I would also say is it's not just about the third-party venues. So we at TrustRadius, obviously, are one of the principal sites that people do visit, not the only site. But what we believe very strongly is that there are other places where people learn about products as well. We've initiated a partnership with LinkedIn recently where they are building a product and services marketplace. And while it's nascent today, we think it's going to grow, become very important because there's 1 billion people on LinkedIn. And we think that people are going to start to discover products there. They may not be active buyers, but they're getting educated by the content on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is testing something called a trending products report, where they educate people in a persona about the products that are relevant to them. And we're starting to feed data into that. We think that's a big deal. The other thing is brands, their own websites and sellers are very influential. I know you're a big believer in kind of effective prospecting. We found that reps armed with the appropriate social proof yield higher conversion rates. We work with Alteryx in the BI space or in the analytics space, where they have trained 1,600 sellers to use sound bites from their reviews to do prospecting and deal advancement. And they found that when they include a relevant snippet that is contextualized to the buyer, like if the buyer has a specific use case like audit, for example, if they send a quote that is specific to that use case, it gets that person's attention. And it's human nature, right? Because what the buyer is craving is, again, validation and social proof. And whether they're self-discovering it through a Google search and a website, or they're finding it on LinkedIn, or they're finding it through a seller or on a brand's website, that's what matters, is that it's social proof from a credible person. There's also a tremendous opportunity to use this content in digital. We see brands that use quotes from their reviews in ads, get higher click-through rates on those ads. And then using that content on landing pages improves conversion. Using that content on information pages improves engagement on page, creates more signal to Google, and helps improve SEO as well. So we think of this as really as a content strategy, first and foremost. How do you get credible customers to say things that are powerful about you, that differentiate you, that fully tell your story, that answer the critical questions that a buyer may have about your products? And then how do you weaponize that content? Don't just have it live on a review platform, have it breadcrumb it everywhere. Put it on your website, give it to your reps, put it into your ads, put it into your nurture. And again, what we're working on is pushing that content into LinkedIn.
Awesome. Okay, so let me quickly summarize. I think you mentioned a bunch of really good points. So basically, most people think about TrustRadius or review sites similar as like this outside review site where we have to have some presence. But what you're saying is that's not how you should think about it. It is a place where you have to do content marketing. Your users are going to write deep reviews there. But how you use that review is the most critical part. You mentioned about how SDRs can use it. You mentioned about how LinkedIn, the partnership that you are doing with LinkedIn, and also try to do it in ads, landing pages, in your campaigns. Kind of use this holistically during each part of the buyer journey to kind of get that social proof, give them relevant experience from their peer customers, and try to move the deals forward. Understood. That makes sense. That's probably a new thing for most of the people listening in, because even I know that TrustRadius, I used to use it on website, but I've never really thought it about as, okay, this is a content strategy and I need to, where all can I insert this to make sure that I move the buyers forward? I have never really thought about it in that way.
At the end of the day, buyers trust their peers. I'm merely a conduit for that, right? I'm a conduit. I'm a channel because we have 14 million people using our site, but I'm also just a vehicle to capture that credible evidence as a third party. And again, the successful brands are the ones who realize that what really matters is the customer voice itself. I'm not trying to kind of outcompete Gartner's brand. Gartner is kind of like the monolithic, analyst firm. My goal is to elevate the actual voice of customers and put them on the podium, not myself.
Yeah, and the 14 million that you mentioned, are these the 14 million people who have left a review, or the people who are reading the review? What number was that?
That's 14 million buyers, active buyers use our site each year.
Oh, that's pretty big. If you think about the whole buying space, it's not that big, right? 14 million is probably a very significant portion of the buying space, at least in US, and probably a significant rest of the world. That's good to know. Another place which you mentioned is, you said that people want to see their peers talking about it, and then they need to have conversations with these peers. How is TrustRadius enabling those conversations for a new buyer?
Yeah, it's something we're working on, and I think it's super important right now. Years ago, I would hear anecdotes from people who'd used our platform or had written reviews. There was a lady at Cisco I spoke to who'd written a review of the social media platform Sprinkler. And, I got to know her, and she shared with me that kind of without our help, a lot of people were looking her up on LinkedIn and asking her more in-depth questions or questions that they wanted to do privately. So we always had a public commenting feature, but a lot of times people don't want to out themselves that they're in a purchase cycle by writing a public comment. They want to be private. And so what we're doing is really a couple of things. We're actually trying to bring kind of the social profile information more prominently onto our site, to actually put those sort of LinkedIn, the links to the person's LinkedIn profile on our site. And we're doing it, again, for two reasons. One is, in an era of mistrust of online content because of Gen AI, we think actually putting the proof behind the content so someone can see, oh, this is a legitimate profile, not a fake profile, we think is critical. Then also enabling people to connect on LinkedIn and then have a private conversation. So that's kind of where we're kind of headed right now in terms of creating that experience on our site. The other thing is, again, LinkedIn specifically within their products and services marketplace have enabled a feature where you can speak to people within your network who may use a product. So, for example, if you're considering Zoho CRM, you can see who in your network has used that product before and reach out to them. We think that's valuable because there's certainly trust in people you're already connected to. You and I know each other. I trust you. I'd go to you for advice. But there's also a great deal of value in connecting people with people they don't know, but who have some relevant expertise, and that they can be assured are credible, neutral, independent people.
So you think of this as like in B2C, there is a micro influencers who review a shoe or like an apparel or like a tech gadget, like MKBHD doing, a bunch of reviews on a bunch of gadgets. Is that how you think about it? Or is it more like a peer-to-peer one-off connections?
I think in time you might get certain people who emerge as micro-influencers in a specific topic. I mean, think of them as, the super advocates or influencers for a product. But I think it's probably a bit of both. I think it's also the average person who's got something intelligent to say and who has a similar use case to you. So, the reality is software is complex and it isn't going to work for every use case. But if you can find someone who has a similar use case to you and has evaluated that same product or used that same product, they may not be an influencer per se, but they are relevant to you. So the idea is to create a forum where, again, we have these voices already expressing reviews, but I want to take it a step further and enable those conversations to occur, because I just see a lot of pent-up demand for people to actually talk live to each other and go further.
And would there be a monetary component in here between the buyer and the person who is recommending it, or is it?
It's a great question. I think initially, no, we're just going to enable connections. But long term, I do actually think there is an economic opportunity to create value and earned income for the experts. Yeah. There are business models like GLG, for example, where people get paid $200 for an hour of their time, $300. And I think when you think about B2B buying on the enterprise side, more so than mid-market and SMB, people are trained to pay for time with analysts. Now, typically, it's not per hour; it's an annual contract. But the value, people don't sign up with Gartner for the reports. They sign up for the events and for the analyst time. Those are the two things that people find valuable. So I think there's a proxy to that in the digital realm that one can enable as well. We won't start there, but I think that's an eventuality to kind of offer that opportunity.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is super valuable is when somebody is trying to buy a product, they don't even know what questions to really ask when they are at the starting point. Even connecting with somebody and say, hey, what are the things that I should look for? If they don't do that, what I have seen happening is they'll go to like one vendor, and that vendor will give all the features that they are really good at. And that becomes the benchmark for asking other vendors, hey, do you do this? Do you do this? And there's no way one vendor will be equal to another vendor. and then that puts the first vendor at a significant advantage, whether it is good or not.
Yeah.
So to your point, if I can simply connect with a buyer who has already gone through that buying process using the product for 7 months, I can say, hey, which are the things that are relevant? What should I use?
I also think another way that we try and help solve that problem, I mean, the problem you're describing, I mean, there's a couple of buyer problems. One is I don't even know what questions I should ask. I don't know what the gotchas are. That's one
Yeah.
question. The second is, what's the real difference between these two products? They're making the same claims. What's really different? In your former company, ZoomInfo and Apollo, they say a lot of the same things, and they
Yep.
both have hundreds of G2 badges, and they both are touting their scores. It's like, as a buyer, how do you know the difference between these products? Who do you trust?
Yeah.
That's why I think this idea of enabling users of the products to actually express the differences in an intelligent way. So if ZoomInfo and Apollo are really differentiated on data quality, I don't know, I'm just sort of guessing that may be a vector of differentiation, then why not have people who've used both products talk about data quality differences if it really is something that differentiates two products? So I think one of the things, again, brands miss out on is they may have really meaningful differentiation, but if they aren't leading their customers to talk about that differentiation in an intelligent way, people aren't going to see it. So one of the things that I've always kind of really emphasized is that helping brands tell their differentiation story is of service to the buyer too, because the buyer's trying to unpack the differences between two products. And, again, asking leading questions that help the customer explain this product really excels in this dimension is useful to the buyer. Now, you obviously want the converse around where it falls short as well, so you can kind of assess truly if it's good for your use case. But I think, again, this idea of giving the vendor some control of telling their narrative, I think, is really important. But then I do think there are ad hoc questions that people have that we need to help facilitate answers to. I think conversations is one method. The other method we're experimenting with is using AI summarization, where we're crawling our content. We're also going out to other forums, social forums as well, and trying to distill what's said about a product, because people don't want to have to go to 10 places to do their research. They'd rather go to one.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon is starting to do this in a significant way right now. They are doing the Gen AI based summarizations or answering engine, basically. So I can go into Amazon and start typing a specific question about a product. Based on all the reviews, they are going to give me the answer that I was looking for. And Google has the search on review, which is also interesting. Like in many cases, I would go to Google Maps. The only thing I want to know living in Washington, D.C. is there parking? Right. So I would always go to a review and say, is there parking? And then I have to read the review saying parking is in like 2 blocks out. I'm like, okay. So it makes sense. I think it's a really big opportunity for Gen AI to do summarization, answering engine on top of the reviews that TrustRadius has today. One question that I had is, when you think about TrustRadius versus the other few review sites, there aren't like a ton, right? Unlike many of the SaaS things, there aren't like 30 review sites. That's not that. There are prominently a few. But how do you think about differentiating TrustRadius with some of the others?
It's the acute focus on serving the buyer and quality over quantity. So, the where we play in the marketplace, really there are three primary brands. There's GPI, and the reason why Gartner Peer Insights obviously exists is as an extension to Gartner's core analyst business and the MQ. So you have many customers who work with Gartner Peer Insights, but the main reason they do that is not the site itself; it's to influence the MQ. If you are in a space where the MQ is still highly relevant, people put focus on that. Obviously, the prominent player in my space is G2. They've done a great job of building scale. Their badging program, while I think it doesn't serve buyers and sellers, I think it has helped them build a big brand. And they have great SEO. So, I think people do work with them from the perspective of getting visible. The audience on G2 tends to skew more SMB. Where we play in the marketplace is really more, we serve, SMB, mid-market, enterprise, but our audience skews more up market. We're really strong in mid-market and enterprise. Our overlap with G2 is only about 19%. But where we really play is helping brands not just attack that audience, but driving content that we think actually helps differentiate them and build buyer confidence. So when brands work with us and one of those other platforms, invariably they are using the content from TrustRadius reviews in their own channels. So you'll see TrustRadius content frequently syndicated to brands' websites, being used by sales teams. We've also started to create kind of content assets that people can use for demand generation that are derivative from their reviews. Again, it's this real focus on content. So we're not going to focus on badges and scores. They exist, we give them out. It's not our core focus. Our core focus is trying to drive content that we think actually helps instill buyer confidence. And there are other things that we do to kind of, again, earn that buyer's trust. We do things like, heavy investment in fraud management. We put a lot of emphasis in making sure that our scores are trustworthy and aren't corrupted by sample bias. We don't have heavy gamification on our site. You don't have to be on this treadmill of constantly driving reviews to score well. What we just try and do is have honest, whole, truthful content about products on our site to help the buyer make that decision. Again, this orientation of buyers first. I very much liken it to how, LinkedIn monetizes, brands and recruiters, etc. But they have this ethos of being member first. I liken it a lot to how we think about being buyer first in our ethos.
Understood. So one of my problems with the review sites, or even somebody like a Gartner, has always been like the serving of two masters at the same time problem, which I think you and I have spoken about a little bit, right? You have to drive your revenue from sellers who want to get in front of the buyers, but you also want to be a buyer-centric platform because that's the ethos of the company and that's where you want to. Isn't there an inherent conflict of interest in this business model, not only for you, but everybody in this space?
It's I will be lying if I said it isn't an acute challenge, but I think it is a tractable challenge. And honestly, we had to make that choice. When I was starting TrustRadius, I looked at consumer proxies, Yelp, Angie's List, etc., as it was first known. And in the web, the idea of gating content and charging for content just meant that you didn't scale, right? Angie's List got crushed by free alternatives, and they had to then flip their business model and start charging the merchant and not the consumer for access. And so I saw the inevitability of needing to have basically free content to the buyer, because people inevitably are going to flock to something that's free versus something that's slightly better and you charge for. It's just human nature, right? Now, I think there are things in time that buyers will pay for, consultations and conversations being one possible area to kind of explore. But, again, I needed to create a model that didn't have a content gate in order to get pervasive usage. And even when we experimented early on, one of the founders of Glassdoor was on my advisory board early on, and we experimented with kind of obfuscating content and saying, you can't get it unless you contribute, which is a model like Glassdoor used successfully for things like salary data capture. We found that it really hurt our traffic when we started to kind of obfuscate content. So we've been very reticent about putting walls up to our content. I think certain types of content can be gated, like maybe, like street pricing data. But I think, review content is not something you can easily gate. That's point one. Point two, we needed to have vendor participation, right? We can drive reviews independently. 47% of our reviews and ratings are driven independently from our own traffic and community. But to go really deep, you need that vendor's assistance because they know who their customers are. Even a company like CB Insights, who has a kind of a gated model, relies on the brands telling them who their customers are in order for them to reach out and get those customer interviews done. And Gartner does that too, right? They're given, even before GPI, they're given lists of who to call. And of course, those were cherry picked lists. So inherently, one of the hard problems to solve is finding people who can write, who can say something authoritative. But to get real scale, it's super helpful to have the brand's involvement. Now, what we've tried to do though is create incentives for the brands to do the right thing. So inherently, most brands trying to introduce sample bias. They only want to give NPS 9s and 10s. That's human nature. It's the prisoner's dilemma. If your competitors are doing that, you're going to do that too. And so we had to do two things. We had to drive independent reviews. So we had, no sample bias in the independent reviews. And then we had to weight them like 100 times more than vendor-driven reviews, because vendors can always drive more volume than we can drive independently. And that kind of brought the scores down. So there's I don't know if this is for sure, but a lot of people talk about how on G2 everything's a 4.7. On average, the scores on TrustRadius are a bit lower. Now, there's probably some bias in the data still, because it's impossible to fully correct, but you'll notice that our scores are fairly consistently lower than on other platforms, because we do correct for that bias. We also created a program called True, and we have about 30 to 40 companies, including the likes of Cisco, participating in it, where they just have embraced the fact that they're better off inviting all customers to review them. We monitor and audit the data to make sure we're getting a normal distribution curve. And those brands then have their reviews treated as if they were independently sourced. They get the same weightings factor in our algorithm. And it just simplifies things. Like for Cisco, we literally go to all of their events around the world and source reviews for them. And so the benefit of that is not only trustworthy content for the buyer, but now they have this incredible feedback machine where they're getting insights that actually help them with product development, because they're not cherry picking. When you cherry pick your reviews, you're not getting balanced insights. You want to hear from your naysayers, and you want to hear from your neutrals as well. That's how you build a better company, by listening to everyone, not just your best advocates.
That makes total sense. Yeah, that's interesting. This has been a problem that I've been always thinking about, so I'm glad to take your view on it. We are going to take a different gear here, Vinay. We move into the last segment, which is more like a rapid fire. You just pick one of the options that you are being given from us, and then you give like a sentence or two explaining why you picked it.
Okay.
So the first one, you said that it is there's a lack of trust right now, but going forward, do you think in a buyer's journey, it's going to be less relevant or more relevant?
As defined today, less relevant.
Oh, interesting. But as defined today, it's less relevant, but that's what you're trying to change, I guess.
I purposely, I don't want to be called a review site anymore. Reviews are a part of what we do. They're an important pillar of driving user-generated content. I want to distance myself from the category. A moniker, a name that we're experimenting with, and we'll see if it sticks, is buyer intelligence. I believe that a buyer intelligence platform is the way forward, not a review site.
Interesting. That makes sense, actually. I like buyer intelligence. On the user identity, I think you alluded to this a little bit. Are you a believer of requiring verified user identity or allowing anonymous reviews as well?
Both. We have anonymous reviews on our site because there are companies who prohibit their employees from leaving public reviews. And maybe you're using a security product and you don't want to out yourself to hackers. However, we verify every review by asking for someone's corporate email ID or their LinkedIn address, and then we go and validate that the LinkedIn profile is valid, because people create fake LinkedIn. So it's actually both.
Got you. That makes sense. This, I think you already answered. You absolutely want to have like a open review platform and not a closed one for all the aforementioned reasons that you did. And on the monetization, so what is the monetization, or what are the monetization models for TrustRadius today?
Yeah, we have two. One is, so it's an open platform, first of all, so you don't need to pay us to list your product, to build out your profile, even to do things like add interactive demos or to drive reviews on your own. We have two monetization offerings. One is what we call customer voice. It's where we help you drive reviews and where we tailor the questions to help you tell your differentiation story. You also then get a license to use the content in your own channels, and we provide tools to curate the content into sound bites, stream them to your web pages, feed them to your sales team. Without that license, you don't have usage of the content, and you don't have these tools to use the content. You can, again, drive reviews and build a profile yourself. You also won't have the lead forms and the CTAs to kind of drive leads from the site. The second business model is intent data, where we basically use reverse IP to understand which companies are researching your product on our platform. And then we capture that data at a product level and at a category level. And then we license that data to companies to be able to use in advertising. For example, we have an integration with LinkedIn where You can target your ads on LinkedIn to just those companies, or you can use an ABM tool and do the same thing in display, or you can route it to your sales team through sales platforms as well. So the idea is the intent data can help you get more yield in your outbound and your advertising.
Perfect. And the last one, where do you play in the review scores? Is playing quantitative scores or qualitative text?
Text. I mean, the scores are there. People still care, and they care more about, again, faceted scores than absolute scores, but the nuance is in the text.
Understood. Awesome. Perfect, Vinay. This was awesome. I had more questions, but we are already over time. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think this was an awesome episode diving into the problems. I think my biggest takeaway here is how should vendors think about the buyer intelligence platforms. Today, Review Site is going to be buyer intelligence platform. How to effectively leverage them to make it easier for your buyers to find you, buy you, understand you. So thanks a lot for giving your opinions.
Thank you, Arjun. It was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.